Hi, everyone. Today I'm here to talk about fear in Bitcoin. Why you hear different things about, the price is going to crash, governments are going to ban it, there could be a hack. These are all the concerns, the fears, the uncertainty that surround Bitcoin. And, if you're new to the space, you've probably heard of a lot of these. You might have some concerns yourself. If you've been around for a little while, I'm sure you've heard these from your friends and family, which can get very, very annoying. So today I wanted to tackle the topic of fear and uncertainty with Bitcoin and go through some of those top concerns and answer those. And so I'm going to switch over to my screen. Now, this first comes out in my newsletter. It's called The Held Report. The Held Report is available if you Google Dan Held Substack. It's going to be the first result. And what I cover weekly are different Bitcoin topics. And this one was around fear and uncertainty. So, okay, diving right in. Now, whenever Bitcoin moves up in price, people are like, wait a second, I don't understand anything about this asset. I don't like it. It's new. It's different. And they immediately react to that, right? They just go, I don't understand this. This is confusing to me. One of those is intrinsic value, the idea that Bitcoin isn't intrinsically valuable. But that's the funny thing, is that Bitcoin doesn't have any intrinsic value, but neither does the US dollar, the euro, or the Swiss franc. No government money has any intrinsic value. It's just printed pieces of paper that we trust. And this comes from the Federal Reserve of the United States. So this is pretty wild to see, right? Like, Bitcoin has no intrinsic value, but neither does traditional money. The idea that something needs to have intrinsic value is silly. Bitcoin is incredibly valuable because of its properties it has as money. It's this new digital gold that you can transmit to anyone, anywhere without permission, and you can store it in your head or on a USB stick. I mean, that's super valuable. Another one here, and by the way, the intrinsic value article is available on the St. Louis Federal Reserve website. So that's where they talk about how all these other government monies aren't worth anything either. There's no intrinsic value to them. All right, so next in the article is Bitcoin is a bubble. I'm sure a lot of people have heard this one. I've been around for 8 years, and it's probably the number one thing I hear. Well, when we look at Bitcoin, so here's Bitcoin's price in the orange, and we have your traditional bubbles like the South Seas Company and, of course, the infamous tulips bubble. They don't last a long time. They typically typically have a few year time period in which they burst up and come down. Bitcoin's the bubble that never pops. We keep exponentially moving upwards in price here. As JP Morgan just recently said, fads typically don't last 12 years. And they're right. Bitcoin has been around for 12 years with no marketing team, no investment bank, no central bank backing it. There's no floor to Bitcoin's price other than the aggregate shared belief. It's not tulips. It provides the world with a huge, incredible new digital store of value that allows people to transmit it anywhere and is very hard to seize. And here's a great chart that I like to check out, which is Bitcoin. So this is Bitcoin's price in log form. And these are each little candle here. So these little vertical lines, that's called a candle. These are 1 month. This doesn't look like a bubble that's popping. Sure, it has little speculative run-ups. Another speculative run-up. Here's the 2013 run-up, the 2017, and now. But there's a floor being created here. See this arc right here? This is a floor. And that floor is through the hodlers, the believers in Bitcoin. When it dips, they buy. Like, see this dip here? This was earlier this year in March. They bought Bitcoin and prevented it from going to zero. It's the ultimate free market of every market participant in the world looking at Bitcoin's price and going, I think that's cheap or expensive. These speculative bubbles bring in greater awareness, adoption, more volume, and more people who believe. So people come for the speculation, a lot of them leave, but then a new class of believers, hodlers, stick around to provide that floor, and then later on they're rewarded. So we're going through that cycle right now. So that's probably the number one question I get. Isn't Bitcoin a bubble? Well, bubbles don't look like this. Bubbles look like that. Okay, money laundering and drugs. I'm sure you've heard this from mainstream press a bunch and from others. That, isn't Bitcoin just used for money laundering and drugs? Well, how about dollars? Most $20 bills have traces of cocaine on them. That doesn't make dollar bills any worse way of transacting. It's just a fact of life that humans will use money for subjectively good and bad purposes. You can't control that. The money should not have it should not be politicized. It should be neutral, because as soon as you insert political nature into money, now all of a sudden you're censoring transactions that may not actually be bad. They just might be the opposite political party's view. And when we look at money laundering, it's between 2 and 5% of global GDP, which is around 715 to 1.8 trillion euros a year. Bitcoin's market cap isn't even that large. That's how big money laundering and drugs, that's how big money laundering and drugs are for the existing fiat market. Bitcoin's not the problem. The existing fiat money is. And I think money should be neutral, so I don't necessarily perceive that as like a problem that people want to use it for whatever activity they like. Volatility. This one's a very classic one. People go, oh, it's so volatile. I don't, that's scary to me. First of all, welcome to any asset in the world. Tesla, Amazon, Google, Facebook, the top performing equities, the top investments of the last 10 years outside of Bitcoin were very volatile. They didn't go up in a perfectly straight linear line. The whole world wasn't going to go, okay, we're all going to very stably acknowledge the existence of how this new asset comes into being perceived as valuable. It comes in ebbs and flows. And what's funny is that if we look at gold, so here's the price of gold over the last 100 years. Now, remember, gold is a 4,000-year-old store of value. That looks pretty unstable or volatile to me. That doesn't make gold a bad money, though. It's inherent to the money. A good store of value has to be a little bit more volatile than a medium of exchange unit of account type currency like the dollar. The dollar is centrally controlled, which means they can control that supply and they can influence demand to keep that purchasing power stable for a short period of time. But what that means is that they totally control it. And that's a bad store of value. I don't want to store my value in something that can be totally manipulated, like the dollar, the pound, the euro. You want to store it in something like Bitcoin or gold. Obviously not gold after Bitcoin came out, because of its inherent better properties as money and its hard to seize nature, and the idea that the supply isn't centrally controlled by someone. All right, so okay, everyone's heard about Bitcoin's going to boil the oceans. If Bitcoin mining continues, the whole earth is going to go up into flames. Okay, first of all, that's not going to happen. Second, have we ever compared Bitcoin's energy usage to the existing financial system or gold mining? Those are massive. Okay, let's take, for example, just think through this. Think about the US dollar. The US dollar has the military, giant, huge nuclear weapons, planes, tanks, aircraft carriers with nuclear generators. You've got that. You've got all the courthouses, all of the government employees, tens of millions of them. And they each live in their own home and drive their own cars and eat food. And all of that requires massive amounts of energy. And then you have Congress. And then you have the money. And then you have like cash printing presses and servers and bank servers. This is the existing legacy financial system. That's a massive amount of energy. Bitcoin, people complain about Bitcoin's energy usage because it's so simple to distill it. It's very explicit. The existing monetary system's energy usage is massive. It's just harder to calculate, but massively higher. And that's where I built out a very rough model. And this was Haas McCook, by the way, has a great article that he wrote on this a long time ago. I took this and modified it. And by the way, this is my most popular article. It's called Proof of Work is Efficient. So if you want to understand how Bitcoin mining works and how Bitcoin's energy consumption works, read this. But here's the funny part. U.S. Christmas lights use energy than more countries. Energy consumption isn't a bad thing. It's directly tied with our standard of living. If I don't want to consume energy, I could live in a cabin in the middle of nowhere, have no running water, electricity, electronics, no dishwasher, no prepared food. Energy consumption is necessary to live as a human and to live a high standard of living. Also, when I purchase electricity or energy, no one should give a shit what I do with it. There's no morality or electricity police to go, excuse me, Dan, you were watching the Kardashians, and that is considered to be an inefficient use of electricity. Or, oh, sir, by the way, your Christmas lights, you have 2x the number of Christmas lights versus your neighbor. How dare you? It's a ridiculous idea that people should criticize Bitcoin energy consumption. These Bitcoin miners purchased the energy, and they're free to do whatever the hell they want with it. So that, I find that one particularly absurd. The other one is that another concern is that there's control. So that, Bitcoin was founded by someone anonymous. So that's kind of scary. I'm like, cool, well, name me off the Fed board members. Name me off anyone in the existing financial system that Most people don't know who the U.S. Treasury Secretary is or anyone else. And that's just in the U.S., right? Bitcoin's code is open source. You can go on GitHub. You can go check out the code. It's all 100% transparent. That's Bitcoin's control. There is no control. It's decentralized and anyone can evaluate it. Bitcoin is manipulated. This one's probably the number 2 biggest one I hear in terms of FUD, or fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Okay, banks globally have been fined $330 billion for manipulating the financial system. Equities, gold, FX, treasuries, literally every single one. You can go to this website and check out each bank and how much they were penalized and the number of times. Everything is manipulated to some extent, but that doesn't make the price any less real. It takes cost to push the market one way or another, and it's not a guaranteed success. But ultimately, that's the most free market version of the price that we have. And so, yes, Bitcoin might have some of this going on, but it's one of the most liquid assets in the world. It has price discovery, which means the price is being found on dozens of venues across the world, and has transparent order books and data feeds. In the traditional financial world, you have to pay a ton of money for real-time market data and order book access. With Bitcoin, that's all transparent. So Bitcoin is also more liquid. This is how much Bitcoin is traded a day, $23 billion. That is more liquid than any U.S. equity. That is more liquid than almost any other asset. And so to say that Bitcoin is manipulated, despite it being that liquid, is really ridiculous. Okay, now a lot of people recently asked me about Tether FUD. So the worries that this one stablecoin called Tether, which is issued by a subsidiary or a company associated with Bitfinex, there's concerns that there's some manipulation going on there, or that it could be fractional reserve and that might hurt Bitcoin. Okay, well, Tether only represents 3% of Bitcoin's market cap. It's tiny. And here I'm just going to go bullet point form through some of the ways that I think it's just kind of a silly thing to be worried about. By the way, Tether FUD has been around for 5 years. People have been complaining about Tether and nothing's happened for 5 years. First of all, a lot of the Tether FUD came out due to a very, very intellectually dishonest article that came out from some University of Texas researchers who basically found that, violated the core principle of research, which is just claiming that correlation is causation. No, correlation is not causation. There's a funny correlation. You can Google this, where Google, the number of movies Keanu Reeves appears in and the number of children drowning in pools. Like, those are correlated. They're not causational, though. There's no reason why that would cause one another. Tether issuance goes up when Bitcoin goes up because people are wiring money into Bitfinex, getting issued Tether, and then using that to arbitrage or move those funds more freely. This is entirely intuitive. You would imagine that US dollar balances go up on exchanges when the price of Bitcoin goes up. USDT is very similar to just the US dollar, or USDC. USDC is another popular stable coin. And why aren't they worried about USDC? They're worried about USDT because it's a nice, simple narrative and it's easy to make people worried about it. Also, when XRP had its recent SEC news in terms of the SEC suing the Ripple company and XRP, Bitcoin wasn't affected. When BitConnect, a 2017 scam, was busted, Bitcoin didn't skip a beat. Bitcoin doesn't care, but Tether is at risk for those who hold it. You're not subject to the risks of Tether if you hold Bitcoin, so it doesn't have any impact on Bitcoin's price. Nick Carter and Dan, and I have terrible pronunciation of his last name, I think Matuszewski, He's the former head of the Circle OTC trading firm. He came out with a podcast episode with Nick, and Dan has moved billions of dollars into Tether. So he knows the process. He covers that extensively, and he dispels a lot of those myths. Let's say there's a worst case scenario and all of the tethers are fabricated. Cool. Well, Bitcoin doesn't care again. As people realize they're holding this tether that isn't worth money, they trade it for Bitcoin, which would make Bitcoin pump. Again, kind of irrelevant. Back in 2013, 2014, there was something called a Willy bot. No one remembers this because it's a forever ago, but people were worried about a bot named Willy artificially pumping Bitcoin's price. It's totally unsubstantiated in the same flavor of FUD. It's the same concern. It's the same as Bitcoin's price climbs. People create crazy scenarios of why it might fail because they can't fathom that it's succeeding, and they come up with this FUD. Now, almost all FUD is unsubstantiated. Sure, some FUD has a sliver of truth, but most of it is just total fear, uncertainty, and doubt with no basis to be concerned. And what I think what all of this really represents, though, is that it's the magnitude of change that Bitcoin brings. Any new technology evokes FUD, which is proportional to the impact it will have on this world. Same with Tesla, cars, planes, trains, TVs, radio, everything else. Even the bicycle. In the 1800s, it was blamed for all sorts of problems, from turning people insane to destroying women's morals. In the future, we're going to look back at this and laugh. It's going to be ridiculous to look at this FUD, this fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and go, oh, that was silly to worry about. So the account that documents all of this old FUD about bicycles, planes, trains, and everything else is called the Pessimist Archive. So this is from an 1896 article. So they go through all these old newspapers and they clip out these ridiculous opinions about how things are going to go, change for the worst. But physicians are blaming the bicycle for lunacy. They were worried that you would go too fast and that your head would hurt or something, or that it would change your brain composition. Pessimist Archive also covered a bicycle FUD story where they were worried that bicycles would destroy the moral fabric of society, as youngsters would go ride their bikes farther away from home and potentially get into trouble. So this is a timeless thing. FUD always comes with new technology. If you enjoyed what you heard today, hit the like button. Really appreciate that. I just stood up my YouTube channel, so appreciate everyone watching. Also, subscribe to my newsletter if you want to get this first on Thursdays. Otherwise, again, it comes out when you're watching this, either on Sundays or Mondays. Hope everyone enjoyed. Cheers.